So this is Unmesh Kulkarni. Thanks for coming here and being here for this session. I appreciate your time. Unmesh Kulkarni, Senior Vice President of Generative AI at Tredence. I'll introduce Tredence a little bit. But in general, my role covers everything from engineering, solutioning for generative AI solutions, large language models, natural language processing, and data science. And I run engineering solution and part of sales engineering for Tredence.
So I think I would like to set up a little bit of context. And for that, you need to understand exactly what Vertex is. So we are a pharmaceutical company. But there is a few quirks at Vertex. One of them is we are a $120 billion market cap company, but we have only 7,000 employees. Most of the time, that size, they are at 20 to 30,000 employees. Then the second thing is that Vertex, the strategy is to reinvest most of their earnings into R&D. So medical affairs, my department is not in R&D. So we end up having a small slice of a small pie. Then also coming, a year ago, we were only having cystic fibrosis. We launched sickle cell this year. And then we're planning to launch T1D as well as AMKD in the next few years, with a little luck and a lot of work. And on top of it, next year, we're going to launch a product in acute pain that is non-opioid based. And we hope that it's going to be a game changer. Now, as you can see, it's a lot of work coming for very, very few people. And so we need to scale and increase productivity. So now what medical affairs does, what we do is we own the conversation between the scientific and medical community and the company. So we're going out and we're educating healthcare providers and scientists on the disease and our product, but it's a conversation. So they're also educating us on the product, as well as the disease and the experience that the patient are having. No. There is a few things there, and there is a few key players. We had a field force. So basically, it's like we call them medical science liaison that are going around and talking to the medical community. Then we have MedInfo that is also collecting information and kind of answering ad hoc questions from the medical community. And then we have the medical director and a bunch of data analysts, which basically is me. And so, again, few people and a very large community to serve. So we need to be extremely careful on how we spend our time, who we're going to talk to, who we're informing, maximizing the diffusion of information and education within the scientific community. And then we have a medical directors that are collecting different type of data and trying to make some insight out of it. And so they're looking at market trends, competitive intelligence, evidence generation, clinical practice trends, scientific exchange, physician feedback. The list is much bigger than what's on the screen. And in order to do that, well, there is a large quantity of data. We're talking electronic health record data, we're talking clinical trials, we're talking claims data. And on top of that, there is also a large amount of unstructured data. We're talking scientific publication, we're talking the synopses that are coming out of congresses. Every time a medical science liaison is talking to a healthcare provider, they're writing little summaries. And you can imagine that multiplied by multiple diseases, it becomes nearly unmanageable. And so that's one of the things that we need to solve. Few people, large community, lot of data. How are we able to make sense of it?
Awesome. Now, thanks for setting the context, Matthias. Before I get into the solutioning aspect of it, I would like to have a quick show of hands. How many of us here are healthcare professionals or working in pharma or medical fields? Wow. How many of us are let's call techies, like doing data science, data engineering, AI. Oh, wow. I think there are so many hands raised for both those questions. I kind of have to conclude that most of us belong in the intersection of the Venn diagram. Many of us are in the pharma healthcare field, and we are in somehow working on data, AI, or maybe large language model applications nowadays for medical affairs. It's fantastic. That's the kind of audience we were really hoping and praying for. Wonderful. So Matthias and I, we are going to talk about how we actually solved this problem, particularly at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. You now have the context. But for the rest of the presentation, it is also important to understand that we are not going to necessarily just talk about the solution for a particular scenario in a particular company. We would like us to kind of maybe share our experiences of how we did some things, what are the options, and more importantly, what are the key learnings out of this experience, so you can take it back to your company, your problem set, and your scenarios, and apply similar solutions, or at least have some guidelines on how to approach that. With that context, a little bit about Tridence. So Tridence is a specialized data, AI, and generative AI solutions provider. We are very focused in this data engineering, data science, and AI space. So if you're probably in the data engineering space, you've heard of it. But we are in a quick things. We are in across multiple verticals, retail, CPG, healthcare, manufacturing, banking and finance, and I'm probably missing travel and healthcare. So these are typically the verticals that we are working in. Just a shameless plug, we are an award-winning partner of Databricks. We just got awarded the Partner of the Year for 3rd consecutive year. And we are very strong on Databricks as well as some of the underlying cloud platforms. Multiple customers across multiple industries. I'm not going to go through all of that. But there are 4 things that we work on, and those are applicable to today's scenario. One is data engineering. How do you actually get your data under control? We kind of tend to think that, hey, generative AI can help me leapfrog some of the problems, or LLMs can solve my problem. Yes and no. You still need to have your data well-organized, well-governed. So data engineering is not unimportant in the new world. Number 2, the actual platform support governance in terms of getting your data ready for analytics, AI, BI, business analytics, reporting, APIs to kind of share data products. Number 3, actual data science and machine learning models. And number 4, generative AI, large language applications. So those are kind of broadly the areas under which we also do, obviously, machine learning operations and LLM operations. So that's kind of broadly the area that we cover in. So Vertex Pharmaceutical, as you saw, is very specialized in certain kinds of diseases that are relatively rare. And as they were shifting their business focus, now they are looking at moving from maybe a few 100,000 patients to tens of millions of patients, right? So now their market size has grown substantially, but obviously your team is not going to scale 100 times more. You need to reach 100 times more or 50 times more healthcare professionals, and you need to reach the right kind of influencers in that situation. So those are the kind of 2 key problems we were looking at. So we partnered, Vertex and Tridence partnered to figure out what are the key types of problems we solve in this new space in order to help business. And then we implemented some of these solutions. So the rest of the presentation is going to walk through the details of what kind of problem it is, so you can relate it to your own worlds. Because I'm guessing most of us actually have piles and piles, silos of data that we need to integrate. Some of it is structured, some of it is unstructured. So think of it as integration of structured, unstructured data using large language models, LLMs, NLP kind of technologies. And then how do you actually enhance some of these solutions using some more advanced techniques like knowledge graph? So we are going to cover that as part of the rest of the presentation. But I'll go back to the problem statements that we identified as priority solution areas.
So as we've mentioned, Vertex is facing, we need to scale quickly. And so one of the big things that medical directors are facing is the vast quantity of unstructured data. And the thing with unstructured data is that it's not only the way you look at it, it's also you can aggregate it in different fashions. So for example, I'm going to answer a very different question if I aggregate all the scientific publication from Italy or all the scientific publication from pediatrician. And so you can imagine that if I pull in every single of those queries, I don't know, 1,000 scientific publication, you will have to read it multiple times for the multiple aggregation to try to find a pattern out of it. And that's just not scalable. And so that's one of the things that we face. The other thing is around keyword identifications. So we have MSL. So when I say in pain, for example, we have identify about 200,000 to 300,000 healthcare providers. And our field force is about 2,000 people. It's a little bit overwhelming to kind of look and say, oh, where am I going to start? The second thing, when generally you look at key opinion leaders, is you look at their influence, but it's not like the scientific community is just a monolith and one community. It's actually composed of multiple small communities. And somebody may be influential at one side, but not at the other side. And so in function of your strategy, you need to be able to adapt and identify those people and then optimize your workforce and who they're reaching to in order to maximize the diffusion of information within the network.
So to quickly summarize, right, we have identified two problems. One is, from technical perspective, the key problem is essentially a needle in a haystack. We have silos and tons of structured data, clinical trial data, for example, and you have also a lot of textual or unstructured data. These might be medical publications, these might be interactions between MSL and the HCPs or patients. So MSL, think of it as like a medical science liaison, which obviously for those of you who are in the medical field, you know this. But for the rest of us, like me, these are experts. And the HCPs are essentially the healthcare providers, they could be doctors, right? So you are actually looking at a very, very small team of experts, and you want to reach out to maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe 200, 300,000 HCPs through, how would you do that, right? So number one, you have one problem is how do you actually do the right research where you extract the right information from medical research as well as other sources of data. Number two, you want to reach out to the doctors with expertise and influence, right? The doctors who have actually expertise. People maybe doctors who have written research papers in that area, right? Doctors who have actually giving speeches and kind of really doing active research and influencing the next level of research and rollouts of the medication, right? So that is the KOL or the key opinion leader. So how do you actually take your small force of experts or your sales force and actually reach out to the right level of expertise, the right kind of expert, as Matthias said, within the cluster that is most relevant to you, right? So technically, the first problem falls into how do I take large amount of data and leverage natural language processing technology, and you actually go through both structured as well as unstructured data. Over the last 20 years, we have evolved the data analytics on structured data quite a bit. But last 5 years, since the launch of transformers and launch of large language models, we now have the ability to effectively extract information from unstructured data, for example, research papers. So what we've done is we developed a solution that, for example, could go through thousands of these data sources, right? Medical journals, literatures, extract the names of the right kind of authors, right? Dedupe them, identify them, because the same name may not actually mean the same author, right? And then we are able to correlate all of that information across these sources, right? And also there is some regulatory material filings, all of those kind of things to make sense of that information. On the second part, which is the KOL or key opinion leader identification, this problem can be solved using what's called graph network. So think about graph as a connection of nodes, right? So one person might be one node. One publication might be one node, right? And it has information about that node, and nodes are connected. Authors may be connected to papers, for example, right? So we are able to ingest all of that information, create that kind of a graph in our system solution. And now, once you have a graph, you can navigate It's like our LinkedIn profiles, right? Who's connected to who, by what? Are we in the same business? Are we in the same company? Are we in the same location? There are many ways to navigate a graph like that to find very, very interesting information. One piece of interesting information is clusters. For example, who might be the right kind of influencing doctors for, let's say, pain medication of certain type, which is non-addictive, for example, right? And Matthias can share more about the strategy, but the idea here was for us to not define the strategy, but to define a solution where the strategy can be very dynamically changed, but the solution needs to work with changing parameters, because the parameters you have today may be different than what you would have a month or a quarter down the line. So your solution needs to be flexible, and it needs to serve both the problems. So the first problem, in summary, is a very, very simple solution where you can ask questions in natural language, let's say English. So you are a scientific officer, medical officer, you don't want to know SQL. Like, I think most of us think of maybe SQL for me is as easy as English, but that's not the real world out there, right? The real world wants to talk to their data, talk to their papers like they're talking to an expert in their own natural language, right? So we enabled a question and answer solution in natural language that would go and sift through all these kind of structured, unstructured data and get the research back to them at their fingertips. Super easy. The second one is actually mining the knowledge graphs to get to the key opinion leaders. And then, of course, you have to take the data in, you have to cleanse it, clean it up, create those graphs, and then create those queries where you can actually get to the right influencers in a very, very short amount of time. So those were the key two solution areas for the two problems that we identified. If you don't mind, let me go through this slide quickly. It might actually answer your question. So this is probably the deepest technology solution architecture slide that we're going to go through. If you have more questions about the actual architecture and solutioning, I see a lot of people taking pictures, so this might be actually interesting for many of us here. Do actually feel free to reach out to me or anyone from Credence here. There is also a way to kind of scan your badge, and someone will actually note down your name and reach out to you later. But let me go through this at a very, very high level. We are basically using the standard Medallion Databricks architecture pattern here. It's not exactly implemented the way at Vertex, but I want to give an illustrative architecture which will apply to most of our scenarios. All right? So on the left side, you have multiple structured, semi-structured, and unstructured data sources. Right? You may have third-party data. For example, you may have claims, you may have medical information, you may have data from your CRM about different kind of HCPs. Right? So you ingest that data, you cleanse that data, you organize that data in a way where you can actually make sense of that data. Obviously, that goes through the bronze, silver, and gold, so you're creating a gold copy of the data. Then you have this whole data lake, GMA data lake, and now, after the data sanitization and creation, you are then creating ways to extract information out of it. NER, the way I've written it here, is basically essentially saying, I'm going to extract certain entities, named entity recognition. I'm going to extract certain entities like names of paper, locations. Where is the doctor located? Right? Maybe if the doctors are located close by, or if they are writing the same paper together, they are closely connected to each other, just like in our LinkedIn, right? So those are the kind of analysis you can do once you have ingested this data and created a graph or a network of these information pieces. The technologies that we use in these situations, not all applying to this particular Vertex implementation, are one, there is something called graph frames from Databricks, which we have used. This is a graph database. We have also tried other GNN, graph neural network libraries like NetworkX. These are fairly standard libraries that are available. They actually help you navigate and query the network once you've built it. So create a set of nodes, make them into a network, and then very easily navigate through them. We have also used some specific, domain-specific language models like John Snow Labs, for example. This is actually a medical-specific large language model that you know, because it's going to be better than a base model like GPT or Llama. Because now they have actually taken some of these languages and made specialist language in the medical domain. So you will typically get better results from that. And then you are going to obviously do the plotly visualization and end user interaction. The end users can type and get a question and type a question, get a response back, like a ChatGPT experience. Or you can, of course, like, speak to it. In many applications, you would just tap on your phone and speak to it to get an answer. Or you may want to see charts that you can even change. Like, I want to see a bar chart or a pie chart or whatever. Based on that, you can have an interactive mechanism to deal with your data and understand that data. So I'll pause here. But before that, I want to point out that all of this needs to be governed properly. Who has access to data? What kind of data we are ingesting? How is it licensed? All of those things. And so Unity Catalog will take care of typically all your governance needs in terms of your architecture.
John, sir?
No, you want to go ahead?
So key learning, be careful with your data. It's a mess. It's also, especially in healthcare, you have many data sets, and it's not necessarily easy to link them together. For example, you take scientific publication, and they have ORC IDs, and then you take claims, it's NPI. You need some way, somehow, to figure that out. You're trying to match them on names. There is 10,000 Dr. Smiths in the data set, and that becomes very complex very fast. So you really need to take care of your data. That's one of the main things, I would say. The other thing that we're still doing is, well, we kind of want to verify on the ground the impact. So right now, for example, let's say we identify a community. Okay, we want to go, so we take our network graph. We're running a community algorithm. We identify a community of interest. Then that community of interest is like, it's like community 1, community 2, community 3. Not exactly helpful. So we also can use the other tool, the NLP, to qualify that community and understand what do they talk about. What is going to be your content strategy to go after those people? Within that community, who are the people we're going to talk to? And that's all and well, but then you really want to look at the impact on the ground. And so, for example, if you take, for cystic fibrosis, let's say we want to push sweat chloride testing, then you would want to, do some A/B test, and in one, sector, you do your test, and then you have a control, and then you look if you're able to impact the amount of sweat chloride testing in a specific market. And that will really tell you whether you have an impact or not. So that's something that we're planning to do that hasn't been quite done yet. On the NLP side, what I can tell you is that we pilot with a few medical directors, and it saves a lot of time. And that can't be understated. And then that gives them the freedom to test multiple hypotheses, to go down through sometimes rabbit holes, that happens, but you can answer them quickly enough. And so we don't have as much known unknown and unknown unknowns as we used to, just because we're able to query that data and analyze that data much faster.
Yeah, I'll add a couple of things. I'll also say something that as a head of generative AI at a company, I probably shouldn't say, right? So when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So what is happening is when we are looking at LLMs and NLP and generative AI, we are like, what problem can I solve with this, right? And that's one way, but a better way is to actually say, what are my biggest pain points from business side, right? So keep technology away at the initial phase. Really look at what is my biggest problem, and then say, what is the best, probably the best solution that I can afford, or what's the best way to solve it with minimum number of dollars, right? And in some cases, you don't necessarily need the largest, greatest LLM. You might be able to solve it using a very simple statistical language model. Or, in some cases, literally some regular expressions, right, which is a few lines of Python code, right? So you have to kind of really be judicious about what technology to use. Don't use it just because it's available. Having said that, what you can do with large language models, especially with domain-specific language models, is fantastic. And you have to open your eyes up to say, maybe things can be solved today that were not solvable 18 months back. That is something which is kind of really mind-blowing. It amazes me how we are solving problems today. Imagine finding key opinion leaders in thousands or hundreds of thousands of people's database who are randomly connected to each other through some connection, some interaction, some writing common papers. How would you do this 3 years back? Now it's super easy to do. And I say super easy, it's still a few months of effort, but it's not like a 5-year project anymore, right? You can actually mine and get that information. So one side, start with the business problem. Second side, keep your eyes open to the new possibilities that are now kind of available to us and new solutions that are available to us. The real-world validation and fine-tuning, I can't emphasize it more. When we roll out something, we have to make sure that we have identified the target users. We actually show them. We run something called as hackathon, where we invite users. We ask them to rate the feedback on a scale of 1 to 10. We ask them now also give them a text box to say, type what you want. Because you know what? I don't need people to read that text anymore. Why? Because AI is actually reading the text and summarizing it for me nowadays, right? So there are many interesting, better ways to actually collect user feedback. But make sure that the feedback goes back into tuning of the models, right? Tuning of the solution and comes back. One last tip. There is the design for reliability and repeatability response. If your solution is going to give you different answers every time, you will quickly lose credibility. One way to solve for that problem, this is a AI implementation tip. Take the user's query and map it to a set of standard prompts. If nothing matches, ask for clarifying questions. I mean, I'll give you an example which is not for medical affairs, but what was my sales for last quarter for this product in this region? Imagine you get 5 different answers, you ask the question 10 different times. You're going to be very upset. You're going to stop using the system. But if the system said, are you talking about recurring revenue or this revenue? Are you talking about this product, that region, this or not, right? And then it maps it to a standard query. And because it's a standard query, you're going to get a reliable same answer back. You're going to win credibility with the user. I think if you can take away one implementation tip from LLM implementations or AI implementations, I think this would be it, right? So make it reliable, make it predictable, and you will win credibility, especially if you keep users engaged throughout the process. Then we'll go through one last slide, and then we'll jump into Q&A for the last 8 to 10 minutes. Design for flexibility. You can use LLMs. You can choose the best LLM you have. You can choose the cheapest LLM you have. You can choose open source, closed source, whatever. Just remember that that's not going to be the LLM you use 3 months or 6 months down the line. Things are changing. Pole positions are getting swapped, right? So you have to kind of really understand that you have to build for something that is going to change tomorrow. So be flexible. And then we talked about it a little bit. Be very careful about cost. And this cost is not just for throwing a bunch of tokens at LLM. What about your data cost? If you're getting third-party data, there is a cost for that. If you're calling third-party APIs, there's cost for that. Right? If you're doing subscriptions, there is a cost for that. So make sure that if you're downloading a file and you're paying $1 for it, it's not downloaded every time. You're not calling the API every time you download a file. So caching mechanisms, prompt optimization, reusing a lot of the data that you have, refreshing the data in a timely manner. So old data is cleaned out, right? So having the complete data pipeline updated. Those are the kind of key things to drive efficient, accurate, as well as not expensive or cost-efficient kind of solutions to this. At this point, I'll stop so we can take a few questions. I think we have still about 7 to 8 minutes left. Before that, Matthias, any remarks on the learnings?
I think one of the key learning for me is really the integration of the business with the data science and the technology. So, network, okay, it's great. You have a graph network, and everybody kind of focuses on the nodes, but actually the vertice between the nodes is really where the magic happens. And so the weight that you can put on those vertices, you need to have an understanding of what they represent. So, you can have a connection because 2 HCP co-wrote a paper together. Perhaps they went to school together. Perhaps they work in the same company. How do you weight that? You need to have concrete answer to that actually is matching reality and your strategy. Otherwise, you're going to have a nice network, doesn't going to mean anything in reality. So you really need to have the business understanding the data science and the data scientists understanding the business and the technology to serve all of that together. It needs to be integrated. And as you know, there can be some miscommunication between those groups, and we want to address that.
Yeah. No, fantastic. That's why we have two presenters. One has zero, real expertise in medical, and obviously we have a business user driving the business cases, right? So it is a partnership between domain experts and data or AI experts, and that partnership is what is going to make your project successful. Awesome, fantastic. Thank you so much for your time again. If you have any other questions, we'll be here for a few minutes. And Anthony out there will actually collect your email if you want to follow up with any questions too. Thank you. Take care.